Hey there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back. It's another Red Pill Religion podcast where we say many things, but one of them, recently said by John C. Wright, is that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, and theologians are the unacknowledged muses of the world. And that was part of another statement we were talking about earlier that the show is titled on, which is that if politics is downstream of culture, then culture is downstream of religion. And that makes John's point correct. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators, and theologians are the unacknowledged muses. That is very provocative. We're going to talk about that. But in the meantime, please remember, in these days of social media censorship, you can always find us on redpillreligion.com. Even if they take us off of YouTube, we are on our new channel. So please, by the way, everybody note that we're on a new channel. This is our third effort because we've been chased off of others and had others messed with. So please let us know. Please, here on YouTube, give us a subscribe to this new channel and give us a like and tell your friends or enemies. And remember that even if this channel goes away, we will always be there on redpillreligion.com, where we also always have new articles and videos every day. And we really would appreciate your PayPal, your Patreon, or your Bitcoin support. Donation buttons are there. I'm looking to getting a new microphone this year and hopefully upping the sound quality soon for these podcasts. So in any case, because of problems with Subscribestar and other funding vehicles and all the problems we've had with Patreon, we are just going to keep the Discord chat room free. So we've gone ahead and reopened that to the public. If you want to join us in our Discord chat room where we talk about politics, science, religion, history, argue theology, argue philosophy, come on by anytime. We like nerd stuff too, comic books and manga and video games. So come on by. Find us on gab.com at Red Pill Religion. Find us on minds.com at Red Pill Religion. Find us on Facebook for now on Red Pill Religion. Not sure how much longer on Facebook, but we'll see. Okay, so tonight is, in fact, John C. Wright night, as per usual. Say hello to everybody, John C. Wright.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
And John Wright, the science fiction writer, and he does other stuff too, including come and talk to us sometimes. Be sure to visit sci-fi-right.com where regularly we see articles. In fact, what have we got on sci-fi-right.com right now? A news story, free story on Judgment Eve.
I put up a new short story or a new entry to my ongoing stories every Wednesday. I have one new article on the Conan canon, but otherwise not much. I have been preoccupied with my current project of rewriting a Star Wars flavored space opera called Star Quest. And as you scroll down, you can see there also had some political observations about the issues of the day, politics and so on.
Well, yes. And speaking of that, I was going to say, how is Star Quest going? I know you met your funding goals.
We met the funding goals, and today I finished the outline. We are already negotiating with artists to get professionally made covers. We've got an editor lined up, so everything is on schedule. And one of the funding things we did that was hilariously, which turned out to be quite fun, that I was rather nervous about, was offering that if people gave a certain amount of funds, that they could make up a character that I would stick him in the game, stick him in the story. As you can see from my slight Freudian slip, I of course also moderate D&D games and other role-playing games, and so I thought it would be hard to take someone else's idea and put it into my story for a character. It's not complex. It's usually like a name and a little bit of background. One guy sent me a 2-page treatment, and I can use, and then I negotiate because I can use some of the material and not others, but several people have put ideas together for characters that, while they'll be minor characters, I've decided to use them at certain crucial cardinal points in the storyline to kind of put the spotlight on them, because people paid me money for the privilege, and I want to see if they get their dollar's worth. So, and I thought it would interfere with my muse, but so far it has not, and no more than as a moderator adding a new character to an ongoing campaign usually doesn't cause me any upset. So
there you go. All right.
That was a pleasant surprise. And yes, excellent. there will be space princesses in my story. For those of you who are wondering,
Beautiful space princesses.
Gorgeous, gorgeous space princesses.
All right, all right. That's an important part. She's got to be a beautiful princess.
It is.
Okay.
It is.
All right, so we're going to break from tradition probably, and probably not even talk about atheism at all today. For people new turning in, we usually do something about on the subject of atheists as two former atheists. But I'm not feeling it today. I'm really not. I'm wanting to do something else. And John, you brought up a pretty cool article from the American thinker called "Waiting for the Next Religion" by a Christopher Cantrill. Who also, he links out something called an American Manifesto that I think he also wrote.
He did. He did. Let me sum up for your listeners what Mr. Cantrell's idea is, and I think you're going to put a link in the underneath so they can.
Links are on the low bar for anybody who wants to click them, and they'll be on redpillreligion.com blog too. So
now, Mr. Cantrell saw one of my ideas that he thought was brilliant. Now, there's no accounting for taste. I don't know why he thought it was smart. But I saw one of his ideas that I thought was brilliant. And, of course, I'm right, and he is brilliant, and he's wrong because I'm an idiot. Here's what his idea was. He said that throughout history, there are basically three categories of people, three ways of thinking about mankind. In the early days of mankind, before the agricultural revolution and before the industrial revolution, basically men were in a position of subservience to kings and emperors and to cruel pagan gods. Your attitude toward your king or your emperor or toward your cruel pagan god was basically the same. You paid your taxes, you made your sacrifices. The god did not care about you or love you. You were not the children of the god. You were like the slaves or the creatures, and you were supposed to serve them. And it was in his best interest to protect you, because otherwise he would feel his kingdom would be shamed. But it wasn't a family relationship, if you understand. Now, Christianity changed all that. With the coming of Christianity and the coming of Judaism, you have the idea of a God who has personal interest in his creation, who sets up certain laws for his men to follow, and then you get the self-reliant men instead of the subservient men. The self-reliant men follow the laws, care for themselves, and are responsible for themselves, but they also feel the need, the moral need, because it's the one thing that God, both the Jewish God and the Christian God, and the Christians say it's the same God, over and over again emphasize, which is you have to care for the poor. So any self-reliant man has to care for a subservient man, just because the subservient man is also made in the image and likeness of God. Does that make sense what I'm saying? You see where I'm going with this?
So sure. That's where the Christian imperative and the Jewish imperative.
The Jews have it too, and if you look back in some of the pagan religions, the Egyptians talked about it, and so did some others. But the basic idea is that of the two psychologies, and Mr. In the article, he said it was urban thinking and rural thinking. I think he's being a little simplistic, but let's just take that as a given. So the self-reliant man has to care for the subservient man. But with the coming of industrialization, widespread industrial scientific civilization, a new type of mindset was emphasized. Not that it hadn't existed previously, but now it received additional emphasis, and that is the creative man, the self-creating man, the artist, the thinker, the revolutionary, the man who's going to revise the entire world, the philosopher who's going to change everything that went before him. Okay, there were revolutions in the ancient world, but there were no revolutionary. There was nothing like the change between Newtonian and Einsteinian worldview. There's nothing like before and after Darwin. Things weren't organized according to revolutions. Hegel, the philosopher, wrote his entire philosophy based on the idea of continuous revolutions that would continually improve mankind, and Marx took that same idea and applied it to political economics and claimed that there would have to be periodic violent overthrows of previous systems to erect new systems. But here's where Marx went wrong, according to Mr. I've forgotten his name, and I don't see his picture anymore. Cranston? Cruddle? And I apologize for forgetting his name, because I thought his idea was brilliant. What Marx did not do is say the creative man should have care and concern for the self-reliant man, the same way the self-reliant man should have care and concern for the subservient man. Instead, he said, the creative man, the bourgeois, the Marxist revolutionary, should have concern for the subservient man, for the poor and the downtrodden. Communism is based all on the claim that they're going to protect the poor and the downtrodden. It's a big lie, but that's the claim.
Sure.
But they identify the enemy as the middle class, the self-reliant types that are taking care of the poor, or supposed to be taking care of the poor, according to their own doctrines. Now, so when he says he's waiting for a new religion, he said he's waiting for a new type of third man that can somehow harness the appeal of this idea that a man is his own person, creates himself, creates his own universe, creates his own reality, and will use that to coordinate with, rather than fight with, the self-reliant man and the subservient man, if you see what I'm saying. He identified that as the basic psychological problem of the 20th century that caused 2 world wars and a Cold War. Okay? So that's the sum up of his article. And what he was impressed with that I said is that I said, you can't have if you're having a culture war, you can't win a culture war if one side has a religion and the other side does not have a religion. And by that I mean the opposite of what you think I mean. Because right now the bad guys, the atheists, are motivated by a type of religious faith and fervor, a firm belief in the rightness of their cause, that the religious people, despite the fact that they have religion, don't seem to have. And the article's idea was that the reason why these guys have so much fervor is their religion is this religion of the idea of self-creativity, the idea that you create your own universe, you create your own reality, you create your own truth.
Yep.
Now, he did not call it by this term, but I will identify that as nihilism, the belief that nothing is really real, is nihilism, and not philosophical nihilism. I don't mean you wear black lipstick and you sit around saying life is not worth living. You do that also, but that's not what the philosophy of it is. The philosophical idea is that there is no underlying narrative that is absolutely true. Truth is beyond human reach. Now, in the debate between the self-creative man and the self-reliable man, the self-aware, self-reliant man, if you go up to a guy who's used to taking responsibility for his own actions and you say, the only one truth is that there is no truth, he's going to stare at you blankly because you just said something that makes no sense in his worldview. Now, it doesn't make any sense in my worldview either because I'm in that worldview. But to the self-creative man, that sounds like a trumpet blast, freeing them from the chains of convention, the chains of bourgeoisie morality, the chains of middle-class narrow-mindedness. They think they are now the paragons of liberty by breaking forth into the new dawn of the utopia that exists if reality is not real. And of course, what you get instead, that we have seen, look in the world around you. You see what you get instead. You see parents injecting children with chemicals to make little boys into little girls, or to have them go into the wrong bathroom.
Let me tell you something. Yeah. We've gotten off of the fact that politics and culture and religion go together, but they do, because the point you're making cannot be stressed enough. In fact, the current secularism at this point needs to be considered a religion of its own, as far as I'm concerned.
A proselytizing religion, a strong religion.
Proselytizing religion.
Yep.
And it matters because this religion is everywhere. For example, at this point, sir, I would have to tell you that the American Psychological Association itself, I'm going to mention this article. This came to me today. I'm bringing it up spontaneously, so I'll add it to the links later. But American Psychological Association issues first ever guidelines for practice with men and boys. And this is the American Psychological Association, the same one that puts out the Diagnostics and Standards Manual 4 and 5, which, by the way, has been visibly moving towards declaring people who are religious to be insane. And they aren't quite there yet, but they're pretty close in their current DSM-5 guidelines. And rumor has been for years that by the time they have their DSM-6, they'll have defined religious belief as insanity. But in any case, they certainly have these new guidelines for how to do psychological treatments on men. And if you read this whole thing, which they're proud of this, they are talking about how they need to educate, how psychologists need to, because of their for example, let's that word. Traditional masculinity is psychologically harmful. That's one of the things. That's from the American. They're teaching this in school. Okay. Here's another one. And this isn't a critical article. This is stuff they're proud of. They're announcing it. Though men benefit from patriarchy, they are also impinged upon by patriarchy, says Ronald F. Levant, Ed.D., a professor emeritus of psychology. And co-editor of the APA volume, The Psychology of Men and Masculinities. Now, they have adopted the scientific naturalist religion, and as part of that, they have adopted the feminist religion, and they have...
by the way, the same religion as Marxism, and the same religion, and the same philosophy as nihilism, which I was just talking about. The metaphysical belief of the feminists is that male and female, that those categories are arbitrary and don't exist. That's their current doctrine. That's what they're preaching. And now they're getting the psychologists on board so they can get... Now, obviously, all that's going to happen is... I mean, you can see what's going on. They're trying to get the psychologists the prestige of science behind their absurd and self-contradictory claims, their laughable claims. But all that's going to happen is they're going to destroy the prestige of scientists. I mean, I used to, even in my lifetime, people used to respect sciences. Nowadays, if a scientist comes out and starts preaching about climate change, he's a fraud. He's a coward that takes money from the government to say things he knows is not true.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the Earth is not getting warm. I'm not saying one thing or the other. I'm saying the process has now been so politicized that instead of the prestige being lent to the absurdity of this new religion, this third man religion, we can call it, the Marxist religion, the feminist religion, the religion of nothing. Okay, that's what it really is. It's the religion of nihilism, of nothingness, the belief in nothing. All that happens is you destroy the credibility, you destroy the prestige that you're trying to borrow. Marx did the same thing to economists.
Yeah.
Marx was basically preaching a religion, and he tried to put it into terms of an economic theory. Now, real economists talk about things like trade imbalances and capital financing and the price of borrowing money over time and things like that. Supply and demand, Say's law. You know what I'm saying? They talk about economic factors. Marx talked about a vision of utopia, of the New Jerusalem that would arrive after the Armageddon of a battle between the proletarian and the bourgeoisie. It was basically the Book of John just reinterpreted. The Apocalypse of John, the Book of Revelation. All these guys are doing is they're now saying, we psychologists have forsworn the practice of psychology. We're now feminists. We're now going to preach this bizarre nothingness religion by telling men that men are not men. A is not A. Okay? Logic is no longer logical. Reality is no longer real. Truth is no longer true. That's their credo. That's the flag they're saluting now with this complete blithering nonsense. Do you actually think men are better off trying to act unmanly, trying to act like wimps, trying to act without courage and forcefulness and honor and keeping their word and defending women and children? They really think men are better off? Are you out of your mind? Well, yeah, obviously, because you're not. Why else did you go into psychology?
As Jim Wilcox in the comments notes, he says 70% of psychologists are women. And I used to think that was that would sound like a good thing because women are kind of naturally, good at being caregivers in that kind of sense. And but no, it actually even further feminizes the entire field. And so even the people of the psychological profession who are not feminist will just absorb much feminist indoctrination and feminist assumptions about men and boys, and they're abusing the. I mean, it's at this point, I would say a lot of this, and I've talked to guys who've undergone this with therapists, right? In a number of our areas, they're actually being subjected to what I would call what used to be called therapeutic abuse. Literally, they're being brainwashed by these psychologists. And I'm not saying there's nothing valid in psychology, but what the field has become is not valid at all. There may be some very good and smart and helpful practitioners, but by the whole, it's just it's a secular ideology. And I want to key on something you said there, which is that they have pretensions to being scientists, even though they are not. They are scientific naturalists, which is, by the way, a philosophy of science. Only one philosophy of science possible. There's other philosophies of science that seem to work better.
Tell your listeners what you mean by that term, because you're using a term of art.
Yeah, well, I'm using philosophers' terms, and let me make real clear. Actual scientific naturalism is a philosophy of science, and you can go look it up in like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy online, and it is one of the ways you can conduct science. Currently, the most favored philosophy of science, but there are other philosophies of science.
Let me interrupt you, because you're not defining your term, and I'll
well, why don't you fix it for me?
Scientific naturalism is the theory that nothing outside of the natural world exists. There's no supernatural world, there are no spirits, there's no God, there are no ghosts, there's no life after death. Everything within science has to constrain itself within a worldview that only talks about nature as matter. That's what scientific naturalism is. It is, as you've correctly pointed out, not a necessary assumption of science. It is merely it is actually a theological postulate that has nothing necessary to do with science. The theological postulate is that the supernatural world is blank, is empty. It's a null set. Okay?
Right.
That's scientific naturalism.
Right.
Is not to do science. All you have to do is say our senses correctly convey to us images of the real world. The real world behaves according to understandable laws, and that we can, by a process of elimination and by a process of experimentation, determine what those laws are and are not. Those are the metaphysical beliefs you need to conduct empirical scientific investigations. You don't need to say and there is nothing outside the range of science. That's absurd. Real scientists don't say that. Obviously, there's things outside the range of science.
So here's the thing. Now let's get back to track, which is the point is that, yes, scientific naturalism is a way of doing science. It does assume there are no supernatural forces, that everything is material.
I respectfully disagree with you. It's not a way of doing science. It's a theological belief about the role of science in
right. And from there you go to methodological naturalism, which is that when your experiments.
But you don't need to be a materialist to be a scientist.
No, right. It's one set of assumptions.
It's one way the nothingness religion, the anti-Christian religion, uses to gain entry to the science and to pretend that it has the prestige of science. And like I said before, Marx did the same thing with economics. The feminists are now doing the same thing to psychiatry. In my field, they did the same thing a few years ago with the Science Fiction Writers Guild, with the Science Fiction Writers of America. They got one or two people in high places in the SWAFA leadership, and they started a program. They started to blacklist conservatives to try to drive us out of the field, so that they could use science fiction no longer to tell science fiction stories, but as an instrument to forward their political goals by influencing the minds of the readers. And they did the same thing in TV. They did the same thing in Hollywood. They did the same thing in your public school system. Okay? I mean, do you understand what these people are? These people are a proselytizing religion who, unlike the Christians, unlike the Jews, unlike the Muslims, lie about themselves, don't say what their ultimate goal is, but you can tell what the goal is by what they're always driving at, what they're always driving for.
And that's the bottom line. The fact is, here's what it is in a nutshell. It is scientific naturalism is like I said, it's this philosophy of science, a philosophy and way of looking at the world, which is potentially useful for some applications, but it's become a religion. And within this religion, they assume nothing supernatural, no God, no anything. And if they can't find a material cause, which is to say, you know, something made out of matter, something made out of atoms, something made out of quantum particles, something, you know, then it's not there. And then from this worldview, from this set of assumptions or axioms, they've developed elaborate ideologies on top of it, even though these axioms cannot be proven. And in fact, they can't prove themselves. And they've developed these other fields, like what psychology has become, where they have all this veneer that they are scientists, and they do some experiments, and they do some statistical analyses. Although, by the way, statistics is just another, there's so much peril with using statistics. You should always be skeptical of statistics unless they're very clean. But anyway, for the most part.
I have a saying I've taught my boys, which is that 9 out of 7 statistics are incorrect. Never believe statistics.
The best book you'll ever read is an old book from the 50s called How to Lie with Statistics. It's written that any reasonably bright 8th grader could understand it, and will tell you every way you can lie with statistics and why you can't trust any statistic. But they use statistics, and they pretend that they have something scientific going on. But when you see through these people, they're a religion. They're an atheist religion, although someone will say, well, I believe in God or whatever. But everything they're saying, there's no science underlying 90% of what they're saying. But they're speaking as if they are clergy and able to give you wisdom from on high. And they are believing weirder and weirder things like toxic masculinity and thousands of years of patriarchy oppressing women, but also oppressing men. It's the feminist narrative, which is a completely batty narrative that has never been true. We certainly have had something called patriarchy, but even that is like, do you understand what there is? Every patriarch has a matriarch. It's a balance. It's a dynamic. But anyway, I don't want to get off too far on that.
The word patriarchy is you got to define your terms.
Yes, because they've perverted
real
it.
Patriarchy existed at the time of Moses. He was a patriarch. Okay.
Sure.
Aside from that, it has never existed. The closest you get to it is there are certain cultures that treat women rather badly. The ancient Chinese and the modern Muslims have a very low opinion of women, and they use and abuse them. Aside from that, no. The idea that there's something unique and conspiratorial about the Western world that is oppressive to women is insane. The idea that any recognition of a psychological or spiritual difference between masculine and feminine is a subtle act of oppression. That's insane. That's an insanity. It's specifically the insanity of a false to facts association, which I'd be happy to explain to your listeners at some length if you're willing to let me later on.
Well, let's see. But I think this is all part and parcel of what we've all got to understand, which is that scientific naturalism and certain political ideologies are at core atheist religions, where they believe.
Because some of the people believe in a life force or a Darwinian type of God. I would say it's an anti-Christian religion. It's not It's not necessarily atheism, but they all agree because they're willing to give a tip of the hat to Buddhism. They're willing to say Buddhism is scientific. They're willing to say paganism or witchcraft is okay because maybe there's some psychic phenomenon that science can investigate in the future.
I'm actually going to contradict you, sir.
Go ahead.
I'm going to contradict you on both of those. My friend, the authentic witch, and I've had a couple of other pagans I've talked to and interviewed too, who are real serious about this stuff, will say that what these people do is they bring in Wicca, which is fake, and they hate them. They're the same, like Wiccans are like feminist, social justice leftists with a weird spirituality, and they brutalize everybody who won't be feminist, socialist with them in their spiritual journeys, huh? And so even the witches can't stand them, huh?
But that goes along with what I said.
Yeah, well, okay, it does go along with the fact that it's some
of them pretend to be witches the same way some of them pretend to be Christians, but what they all have in common is they all are anti-Christian. They all hate Christ.
All are anti-Christian first, right? That's true. Although I'm not, I'm going to put the brief out that they have been known. I mean, the Buddhists they'll be nice to. They like to encourage something called secular Buddhism, which is fundamentally despiritualized, neutered Buddhism, and they've been known to murder real spiritual Buddhists by the millions.
Now I do stand corrected because I said the truth, but not the whole truth. The truth is that anything that they can use as a stick to beat on Christianity, to beat on the Western civilization, and to beat on America, they will pick up. But the moment the stick has anything, the moment it becomes inconvenient, they throw it under the bus. They'll sacrifice it to their religion, and that's what I mean when I say culture is downstream religion. Their religion sets the axioms, the basis, and the foundation of their worldview. Their culture, the culture war, is taking place at a next higher level. That's the level at which popular entertainment, mass education, and debates in the academic world are trying to shape public opinion. And in those areas, that's where they've spread the idea that science is on their side, or that there's a type of scientific Buddhism, or a type of diversity of opinion about certain religious questions, where they can say, we'll welcome hearing from a witch, we'll welcome hearing from a Buddhist or a Muslim, because they want those people as possible allies against the mutual foe, the West, the Christendom. But the moment the witch says, I believe that there is a divine supernatural world, and through many reincarnations I've gotten closer and closer to divine source of light that is the reality behind all the masks worn by many gods, and some witches talk this way. At that point, the nihilist will say, you're attempting to impose a narrative on me. You're just as bad as a Christian, so I throw you under the bus. You're out of here. And that's what your friend was complaining about, and he complained correctly. Because all the Antichrist religion is willing to use all of these cultural forces against Christianity, but they will purge themselves of heretics the moment they get the chance. They always turn on themselves. They always get into a purity spiral where you have to prove that you're more faithful than the next communist, that you're more communist than the next communist, that you're more atheist than the next atheist, that you're more, devoted to the cause than the next devotee.
Well, we're always
and they throw each other under the bus.
They do. If you look at the story of the Dalai Lama, for example, and we mention other religions and how they get persecuted all the time here. It's an important issue to us on Red Pill Religion. You look at the real story of the Dalai Lama. They had been the chief people in Tibet for like at least a couple thousand years, I believe. These Buddhists, and when the Maoists, the scientific rationalists, scientific naturalists came in, the Dalai Lama, the current one there in Tibet, was actually very receptive, which happens a lot. He was like, you know what, we do need reforms. The system isn't fair. We need to do more for the poor. You have a point here. He was actually trying to cooperate with them, so they let him cooperate for a while, and then Mao told him, people like you need to be wiped off the earth. And he had to flee for his life.
Do you remember the column that started our discussion this evening? And the Mao is the member of the self-creation religion. Yeah, there we go, Mr. Chantrell. I'm sorry I forgot his name. I apologize to him. The Dalai Lama is the guy who is supporting the law. He's the self-reliant man, and the poor and the oppressed are the subservient men who need to be supported. You know. Mm-hmm. And so Mao turned on him as soon as he was no longer useful.
And even he's far from the only case. It's actually happened to me, but in a small way. But it's happened to countless other men over the last century or two in dealing with rabid secularist globalists. Yeah, they're friendly to religious people until the religious people, no matter what the religion actually, but then the religious people are no longer useful or no longer on side. The religious people need to be destroyed. By the way, they also do this to gays.
Yeah.
What our culture calls gays. They do it to gays and lesbians and trans all the time. They come in pretending to be their friends and pretending to be their champions. And then when they have accomplished their goals, they actually literally do things like declare them perverts and throw them in prison or grind them up in meat grinders and kill them.
It happened in the 30s in Germany. The National Socialists who ran, I mean, Hitler was elected in a democratic election, and one of the planks of his platform. If you ever read the platform, it's highly instructive, by the way, because it sounds like the modern Democrat Party platform. Was on things like public schooling, redistribution of wealth, land reform, and also a morality platform. But a lot of the early National Socialists were gay people, and were sexually disordered. And then once Hitler got to power, he sent them into the camps along with the gypsies and the Jews and the mentally retarded.
This is a hidden reality. We've been told Hitler was a Catholic Christian and all that, but no, in reality, he was a rabid secularist. He hated Christianity. He professed it very early in his career, but then turned against Christians and persecuted millions of them, including Maximilian Mary Kolbe, my patron saint, by the way. The truth is, yeah, one of the things they did is the National Socialists, the Nazis, they went after the universities, they went after the intellectual elites, right. They went after the gays and the weird ones and the ones who felt socially ostracized, and also the kind of, the nerdy intellectual types who weren't popular. And
all people who defend this kind of revolutionary talk in the beginning.
Yeah. And Hitler did that, and then he wound up killing almost all of them.
Lenin did the same thing in Russia.
The Chinese have gone through a couple of cycles
of China, Pol Pot was so vehemently against intellectuals, even though he himself was an intellectual and was supported in his revolution by intellectuals, that he ordered everyone who wore glasses to be killed, and the theory that they had weak eyes because they read too many books, and there might be a source of, there might be a source of.
What Pol Pot did in Cambodia, he was a rabid secularist and anti-religionist. Another case, by the way, of massive persecution of Buddhists by these same type of people, these scientific naturalists, globalists. We know best for you because we are the scientists and we have the PhDs, and we know what is best for you. And they are quite frightening, and they can come in male guys or female guys. In fact, I noticed this terrifying article on the American Psychological Association's own website is written by a Stephanie Pappas. Okay, so not only is she a woman, but she is definitely a feminist, right. And that suffuses her ideology. She will abuse any men in her care. Right. So will anybody following the things here. And eventually, and in a boomerang way, by the way, I would rant is that these people will damage the women in their care in the long run.
Of course.
Because what they're offering the women in the long run is this feeling of empowerment and this feeling of this rush, this thrill of all kinds of,
what they're offering is envy. That's all. The women under feminist regimes do not get any more power.
Yeah, they do. Well,
they lose power. They get the promise that they'll get power. They get the promise that they'll take retaliation against the men that they hate. And that every boy who offended them in high school will now be, under the smashed down by the iron high-heeled shoe of feminist domination. But all that really happens is the weak men make women crazy, and crazy women make men weak. All that ends up happening is romance flies out the window. You no longer have strong families. You have kids being raised by one parent. They get psychologically damaged, and the damage goes down the generations.
No, but I'm gonna no. They hand women an enormous amount of power, although under the guise of empowerment. Although there's the whole problem with the word empowerment. If somebody has to give you power, you don't actually have it. But legally, we've given women. Legally, we have given women the power to point to a man and say he raped me and have him put away. We have given through the family court system the power to, your wife can take your children away from you right now, sir. And even as a lawyer, I can tell you, you wouldn't be able to defend yourself very well. You'd have to, if she turned psychotic and evil on you. which of course turning feminist would do to her. Not that I'm making any aspersions at your wife, but I mean, I've done work in this area for years. We've handed huge power to women under feminist theory.
I am a lawyer.
But in the long run,
I am a lawyer. I'm familiar with the law. The law is 100% on the side of women when it comes to family law. The laws have been rewritten to eliminate certain needs for objectivity, certain needs for evidence. They're in an atrocious situation right now, and men don't complain because it's traditional that men don't complain about when women are attacking them.
And what's happening to young boys? What's happening?
The feminists are taking advantage of that. There's a war on boys. The boys are being taught to be girlish and whiny and weak.
There's been a war on boys for 20, 25 years in the public schools. We escaped it. Well, guess what? Those boys are now in their 20s and early 30s. They're our millennials, and that's part of the damage that we've seen because they have, I mean, and a lot of young men are very angry about it when they hear some of the things we say from our generation that don't sound wrong. They get angry, like protect women and children. They're like, who is more protected than the women right now? A lot of guys in their 20s and 30s are seeing that right now. We're fortunate. We're not living that, but a lot of guys in their 20s and 30s are. But even still, what I would say is that you're ultimately right because exercise of that kind of illegitimate power over other people eventually destroys you. And a lot of these women, they're going to get into their 40s and their 50s. And I mean, suicide and more is what I'm projecting.
Yeah.
A lot of them wind up in their 40s and 50s just miserable, drug addicted, alcoholic, unemployed.
And sexually perverse. That's why sexual perversion is so popular these days. Because normal, healthy relationships have been driven away. Normal romantic relationships, erotic relationships between, husband and wife are no longer. When is the last time you saw a husband and a wife in love with each other and having a romantic relationship in a movie or a TV show? It's never portrayed.
No.
No one ever talks about it. And yet, speaking as your special sexual counselor from one to another, if you want to have the best sex ever, if you want to have great sex, the most erotic sex imaginable, get together with your wife with no contraceptions and try to make a baby. That will really get you turned on more than anything else you ever want to talk about. So don't tell me about your Playboy bunnies and their artificial plastic boobs or your bizarre love of one sex or two sexes or three sexes or marrying the Eiffel Tower or having sex with a dog or any of these other perverted things that everyone thinks are so erotic. That's all garbage. That's all leftovers, okay? That's a shallow, pale reflection of the reality. And someone has persuaded their entire United States and maybe most of the civilized world to feast on shadows and not eat the food that's set before them. They're told that the filth in the chamber pot is the food, and the food on the table is the filth. so they get everything they don't want, and they get nothing. And you're feminist, yes, she has the power to kill her child in the womb, to take away children from her husband. But what is she really going to get? No man's going to be willing to marry her.
She can kill her own children with impunity quite often.
She's going to die alone. I mean, is that actually the life she wants?
Die alone, unmourned and unloved.
Yeah.
There you go. And alone. I mean, there was recently.
Is that the power you wanted, madam, or is it just envy? You see, there are. I don't know if you know this, but when the suffragette movement started, the majority of women did not want the vote. They thought it would destroy the family.
I can tell you all about the suffragist movement, having done men's issues work and that movie I was in. But yes, in fact, there were two versions. There were really more than one suffragist movement because the original suffragist movement was a movement to get the vote for all men and women. And the suffragettes, quite a bit of the women suffragists were upper-class women who only wanted to vote for upper-class white women like them. And in fact, indeed, on the passage of the 19th Amendment, the white suffragettes threw the black suffragettes under the bus. That happened. Okay. And that's not even going by the fact that if you go into the 19th century in England and places like that where women first got the vote, women often got the vote. A lot of women got the vote before a lot of men did. Yeah. From the women's suffragist movement, because the women's suffragists, for the most part, wanted wealthy women to get the vote.
Tell me more about the patriarchy, where women can vote and some men can't, and black men can't.
Tell me more about the patriarchy when the 18th Amendment, which came before the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment gave women the vote. The 18th Amendment was ratified before that on the power of women's demands. The 18th Amendment, which outlawed alcohol prohibition, it was women who got that done, and they didn't even legally have the vote for the most part.
And it was the same. And it was the same women, by the way.
I'm just
it was
saying.
many of the same actors, many of the same public speakers and stuff were the same group of women. You know, that you hear about in the suffragette movement. They're also Carrie Nation, who chopped apart a pub in the they don't call them pubs in America. Chopped apart a saloon with an axe. Was a suffragette, you know.
Carrie Nation. This has got to be my favorite picture of a feminist ever. Carrie Nation. At least you knew she meant business. She wasn't kidding. This woman ran around because she was for outlawing alcohol, and she was one of the famous figures that helped make alcohol illegal. And she ran around and she would, you know, bust in on bars or taverns and, you know, take that axe to you know, casks of beer or whiskey. And the thing is of course when she showed up, no man would touch her because, of course, you don't hit a woman. That's the rules in those days. So she would get away with just walking around and just tearing a place apart. And more than once, she was charged for her crimes, but the judge would give her a sentence of, I'll suspend your sentence if you leave and promise never to come back to my town again. And she would go around the country that way. I'm sorry, there was never a time under so-called patriarchy where women were oppressed. It was recognized that women had different roles and different power and different accountability and different, you know, but they were never oppressed. They were never oppressed. It never happened. I'm sorry, I mean,
in the West, the Turk, of course, would raid ships and capture women for sexual slavery in the harem. That actually did happen, and not just in sexual fantasy stories. So, in the West. No.
Even the West, but even in those, even in some of those Eastern regimes, you wind up finding out that, like, you know, like I've talked to plenty of women who of Muslim. I've seen stuff from Muslims. I like this religion just fine. I like these rules just fine. But you know, that's probably taking us too far afield because those are the more moderates, not the crazies, I guess. But yeah, it's such a myth, this patriarchy thing. Yet the people in this scientific, naturalist, globalist, progressive vision of the future just accept this idea that for thousands of years, not just Christians really, but like absolutely everybody has been oppressing their women. It's just a matter of who did it worst. And of course, the patriarchal Christians were the worst. That's just kind of has to go without saying.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll tell you who I'll actually go all Christian-y on you.
I'll tell the Virgin Mary next time I see her. By the way, Queen of Heaven, you're terribly oppressed.
The Queen of Heaven, yes, women are so oppressed. The Virgin Mary is the Queen of Heaven for those of us who are proper Christians. But in any case, I forgot what I was about to say, except that I'll go all religious on you too at another level too. You know what patriarchy really means? God the Father.
Ruled by the Father.
Yeah, God the Father actually is what I believe they're actually. I believe they're literally talking about God the Father. That's truly what they're rebelling. That's truly
the rebel they're all rebelling against is God, because if you find out, because male and female He created them, correct? Well, they don't like that. They want to be able to choose their sex. Okay. Which you can't. God created the animals and the men as different orders of being. Animals, men, and angels are different orders of being. They want to conflate that and say animals have rights. I'm sorry, animals don't have rights. God created animals for His glory, and it behooves us as His stewards not to mistreat them. I'm all in favor of treating animals with kind-heartedness, but saying that they're the same as us, they're trying to undo the 7 days of creation in reverse order, starting with men and women not being the same, and then moving on to men and animals not being the same, and so on and so forth. And soon they'll get back to darkness and light being one and the same, because they're nihilists, because they believe in nothing, or I should say rather, They believe that they are God. They believe that they can create reality by their own brain effort, and that whatever they say
Yes.
is real is real. That's why to them, that's why control of the language is paramount to their religion. You see,
Yes.
I myself, I don't care if the steak I'm eating is called a luscious sirloin smothered with delicious mushrooms, or if it's called burnt dead cow with fungus on top. It will taste the same to my taste buds, no matter what words are used to describe those two things, because that's actually the same reality. The words simply point at the reality. Sometimes it's points correctly, and sometimes not. But in their universe, they're in the universe of magic, which they say we believe in, but
In magic.
they do. They believe if you change the word, you change the reality. If
Yeah.
you call the same man by a negative term, that makes him bad. If you call the same thing by a positive term, that makes him good, even though the man has not changed in any way, shape, or form. And I promised you earlier I was going to explain this idea of mine of what I call false effects associations. What you do is you take two unrelated ideas, let's say abortion and freedom, okay? And you connect them. You say abortion is freedom and freedom is abortion, and you say that over and over again until your listeners are foolish enough to let themselves fall into the temptation of believing it. Now, I should point out, as a moral matter, you're not responsible for their gullibility, but then again, you are responsible for your deception, if that makes sense. He still has free will. He could choose to ignore you. But if you tempt someone into a sin, then you're a tempter, and that's the sin itself. So, after you associate in his mind these two unrelated ideas, so he thinks it's the same idea, you manage to outflank him because now he only has two ways he can go, and the third option is one you never say. The way on the left is to say, well, I believe in freedom. So whenever the guy says, but wait a minute, isn't an abortion just killing a very small person that lives in mommy's womb? And instead of answering the scientific answer, which is, yes, obviously it is an organism, it has human DNA, it's the child of two other humans, therefore it's a human, therefore you're ending his life. The legal definition of murder is the unlawful slaying of a human being without justification or mitigation. Yes, it's murder. Obviously. They don't have to answer the question anymore, because once you associate, let's say, the word freedom with the word abortion, all the guy says is, "Oh, wait a minute, isn't that killing a very small person?" You say, "You, sir, are an enemy of freedom. You are a tyrant." And you'll go, "Wait a minute, I just don't want babies killed." You go, "No. You are an enemy of freedom. You hate women. You're a hater. You're enemy of freedom."
I'll tell you what, the way to fight
last sentence. Anyone who's dumb enough to believe you, they fall into two categories. The stupid person who says, "Well, I love freedom, therefore kill the babies," and the person who's stupid enough to say, "Well, I love babies, therefore let's have tyranny, let's have tyranny." You see? And until you make the distinction between the two unrelated concepts and say, "Wait a minute, who used a thread to tie these two things together?" If you want to tie together freedom and freedom of speech, that is a logical relationship where there actually is a reality behind that connection. But if you tie together freedom and abortion, that is bullshit. There's no relation between freedom and abortion. And if I wanted to kill my rich uncle so I could get his money, and I wanted to call that the right to choose, I choose to kill my uncle because I want to choose to have his money after he's dead. No one in his right mind would believe you. But if you call baby killing the freedom to choose killing a baby, everyone and his grandma is going to go, "Oh, well, I'm in favor of freedom, so yeah, kill the babies." Except they're not calling babies. They have to use the magic word power to say, "I'm going to point at a baby and call it a horse or call it a fetus." And now, of course, it's going to magically be a fetus. I'm going to point at a deer and call it a horse. I'm going to point at the sky and call it the ground. I'm going to point at good and call it evil. I'm going to point at man and call him tyrant instead of calling him husband. I'm going to point at a woman and call her oppressed instead of calling her rich white queen. Tell me about Queen Victoria being oppressed by the.
Let me tell you two things that we all have to recognize, which is that we have to take control of the language back from them. And I find that the most effective way is to use their terms against themselves, which, by the way, is an Alinsky tactic, and it does work. But we all have to recognize when they're doing it. Learn up on something called neuro-linguistic programming. This is part of what they use.
You have to read my book Null A Continuum then, because neuro-linguistic programming is the the MacGuffin in the Null books by a writer named A. E. Van Vogt, a science fiction writer from the 1940s, and I wrote the authorized sequel.
Right.
The program is non-Aristotelian philosophy, Null A philosophy.
What is this book title again?
Null A Continuum is my book. The original author is named Van Vogt, V-A-N-V-O-G-T, and his books were called The World of Null A and The Players of Null A.
Okay.
It's just a science fiction treatment of a society where neurolinguistic programming has become the dominant philosophy. So everyone who has undergone the programming is more sane and mentally balanced.
Yeah, and neurolinguistic programming is a real thing. It's related very closely to the practice of hypnotism. But the reality is this is the way they do it. You've got to turn things around on them. And one of the things you turn around on when you look at somebody like this, you look at these people from the American Psychological Association. First off, they'll tell you religion is is potentially dangerous and bad, which is a warning sign, because they won't admit they have a religion, and they'll claim we're on it. You know, we're not religious. They'll play that I'm an atheist, so I don't have a religion, therefore I'm neutral. Or we set religion aside, which means you work on atheist assumptions by default. It's a religious viewpoint. Scientific naturalism is a religious viewpoint, and it's a set of theological and philosophical and axiomatic assumptions that they can't even prove.
Please, no one can prove his axiomatic assumptions. That's what an axiom is.
Well, that's true, but I would say that
they claim it's science, and you can prove scientific conclusions. So you're right to say they're axiomatic assumptions, not scientific conclusions. They are not being scientific about this. They're claiming the authority of science, the prestige of science, but they're bullshit artists. They're bullshitters.
Yeah, which goes to the point that to repeat too, scientific naturalism itself cannot prove itself by its own axioms. It literally can't, and that's because there's nothing provable. Nothing can. I know, but
its own axioms.
Right. So it cannot prove itself, which means fundamentally those who accept it as their entire worldview, not just one worldview they have when they're doing science, but their whole dominant worldview is scientific naturalism. It's completely religious, and they run to the psychologists to explain everything, and the sociologists to explain everything, and the economists to explain anything. Are you seeing a pattern here? These are all actually, I would say to you, sir, that economics is the numerology of our atheist religion today.
Economics is certainly the numerology of Marxism, but I don't consider it to be legitimate economics. I consider it to be a religion that masquerades as economics. The same way social justice warriors in my own field of science fiction writers pretend to be writers, but they're actually just propagandists for the left, for the progressive.
And most of their books suck. They don't even like reading each other's stuff.
No,
they just read each other good reviews. They don't actually read each other,
Correct.
But anyway, listen.
But that's still on topic, because they're doing to the psychologists what they did to my field, what they did to the education field, what they did to they did it to the scientific field, and I would have thought the scientists could hold out, but the scientists can't hold out because of the way the money is distributed.
More to the point.
Look at the way nowadays people are being purged off of Patreon. They're being purged off of YouTube. They're being purged off of all the social media. It's because the stupid people on the right are simply letting these religious proselytizing fanatics get away with it, because we don't seem to realize that they have an agenda. They have an agenda that goes back 100 years, 200 years.
In fact, let me close on that, and maybe we'll do a whole show on this next week, because I think one of the best tricks they pulled, and it's happened since the 70s. Even Richard Feynman warned about this, and a few other great scientists, Nobel laureates, warned about it, and it was true.
Yeah.
What they didn't use this phrasing, but a lot of the great scientists warned that there were real problems coming into science now, and the people controlling it. And I truly contend, we thought the sciences were immune, the hard sciences were immune, the natural sciences were immune. No, they indoctrinated a whole generation in scientific naturalism.
Well,
and most of the working scientists are working under scientific naturalist presumption on everything they do. They actually did creep it in with scientific naturalism, because real scientists know you can't do everything with naturalist assumptions. But they've indoctrinated a whole 2 generations of scientists in school to say this is the only way you do science, and it isn't so.
For your next show, I would like to say the astonishing and heretical doctrine that in order to do real science, you have to be Christian or have a Christian worldview, because there's certain assumptions in the metaphysics of the Christian worldview that you need in order to believe that your senses are accurate, that the human mind is so constructed as to understand the laws of nature, that nature has laws, and that nothing happens for no reason. And the moment you try to divorce religion from science, you get scientists saying things like, well, at a subatomic level, things happen for no reason. Well, no, that can't be. If that were true, there's no science at all. You know,
I think it's time to do a science episode next week, because we are running late now, so we need to wrap this puppy up. I think it's going to be the scientific naturalist religion. I think we're going to do the scientific naturalist religion next Wednesday, unless something bigger happens.
Let me say as a farewell comment, I've talked about this nothingness religion, this nihilistic religion, which goes by many names. It calls itself progressivism, it calls itself communism, it calls itself feminism. It just changes its names every few years. But you can always tell it by certain hallmarks. One, it never identifies itself for what it is, because it's a religion of liars, okay? I'm sorry if you're a progressive, but you've been lied to and you've helped spread lies, because if you believe every man creates his own truth, then you believe there's no truth to which you have to be loyal, right?
Yep.
2, they always saw off the branch they're sitting on. An argument that if the argument were literally true, they themselves could not exist and could not be making the argument they're making, because they eliminate things like free will from the discussion. They eliminate things like human consciousness from the discussion. They eliminate things like scientific naturalism. If it was literally true in all respects, doesn't allow for human beings. We'd have to all be meat robots if it were true.
And let's leave it at that.
Okay. So the hallmark is they never identify themselves. They always chop off the branch they're sitting on, and they're always hypocrites. Always they enunciate conclusions that they themselves or the people who taught them were saying the opposite 10 years ago or 100 years ago. Look at the way some people who were willing to fund a border wall 10 years ago are now saying it's immoral to do such a thing. Why wasn't it immoral 10 years ago? You know?
Yeah.
Well, that shouldn't surprise anyone if you know what the other hallmark is. They're always angry at the past, and angry with a bitter, visceral hatred of the past. You see?
And ultimately, it is a reductionist worldview where they eliminate things to get ahead somehow. And it's all, they've cut away God, and then they wind up cutting away every other idea they don't like until there's nobody left. And in fact, if they really had their way and they had complete control, within a year there would only be 2 of them left, and they'd be wrestling on the ground trying to kill each other, most likely.
Because it's the nothingness religion. They're nihilists. They believe in the nothing.
That's right. So everybody, tomorrow night we got an interview with the Slim Jim, a new religious YouTuber. That's going to be fun. Please, we are again here every single night. Please remember to visit us on Red Pill Religion. We are looking to buy a new microphone. So if anybody wants to hit the tip jar to help that would be good. Remember to check out our Discord chat room. Remember to visit sci-fi-right.com and see what he's got going on there. Yeah.
Hit my tip jar, because I'm going to be leaving Patreon as soon as I can find some other place to go.
I need to get off Patreon too. I'm so waiting for.
I am so sick of those people and their smarmy hypocrisy and their filthy lies. They're supposed to take money from my generous patrons and hand it to me, and in return I give my patrons what they're paying for. And I didn't hire them to be my mommy. I didn't hire them to be my father confessor. I have a priest. Good.
There you go. All right, everybody. So please give us a like. Please give us a subscribe. See you tomorrow night. Tell your friends or enemies. Remember, we're on our new channel. Please subscribe and hit that bell. Yeah. All right. God bless everybody.